It is almost midnight. The streets of Boston are silent under British occupation. Somewhere in the darkness, 700 redcoats are climbing into longboats, their muskets gleaming in the moonlight, preparing to strike a blow that will crush the American rebellion before it begins. And standing between them and the destruction of everything the colonists have fought for is a 40-year-old silversmith on a borrowed horse. In the next few hours, Paul Revere will ride harder and faster than he ever has in his life. He will dodge British patrols. He will be captured at gunpoint, and he will set into motion a chain of events that ignites a revolution and changes the course of human history. This is the true story of the Midnight Ride. Paul Revere was born on the 1st of January 1735 in the north end of Boston, Massachusetts. His father, Paul Revere, was a French Huguenot immigrant who had fled religious persecution in France and arrived in Boston as a boy of 13. The elder Revere became a skilled goldsmith and silversmith, and when young Paul was just 13, he pulled the boy out of school to begin an apprenticeship in the family shop. For the next several years, Paul learned the meticulous art of shaping silver and gold into elegant teapots, bowls, and flatware. It was demanding, precise work, and Revere excelled at it. But tragedy struck the family in 1754, when Paul's father died, leaving 19-year-old Paul as the head of the large household. He was technically too young to legally take over the shop. Needing income to support his mother and siblings, Revere enlisted in the Provincial Army in 1756 during the French and Indian War. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in an artillery regiment, he participated in an expedition towards Crown Point in New York. Though the campaign saw little action, the experience gave Revere a taste of military life and a deep appreciation for the defense of the colonies. He returned to Boston and took control of the silver shop, and in 1757 married Sarah Orne. Together they would have 8 children. When economic hardship gripped Boston in the years following the war, Revere proved himself remarkably resourceful. He supplemented his silversmithing by teaching himself copper engraving, crafting surgical instruments, selling spectacles, and even practicing dentistry, wiring false teeth into the mouths of his neighbors, including a loyal physician named Dr. Joseph Warren. That friendship would one day change the fate of the nation. By the mid-1760s, the relationship between the American colonies and the British Crown was deteriorating rapidly. When Parliament passed the Stamp Act in 1765, taxing paper documents throughout the colonies, Boston erupted in outrage. Revere threw himself into the resistance. He joined the Sons of Liberty, a secret organization of patriots dedicated to opposing the British overreach. Revere quickly became one of the most active and trusted members of the revolutionary movement in Boston. He was not a wealthy gentleman like John Hancock nor a fiery orator like Samuel Adams. He was a working man, a craftsman with calloused hands and an unshakable devotion to liberty, and that made him invaluable. Revere could move through every level of colonial society, from the docks to the drawing rooms, gathering intelligence and building networks of trust. When tensions boiled over on March 5, 1770, and British soldiers fired into the crowd of colonists in what became known as the Boston Massacre, it was Paul Revere who created the now iconic engraving of the event, a masterpiece of propaganda that spread outrage throughout the colonies. In December of 1773, Revere was one of the ringleaders when colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded 3 ships in the Boston harbor and hurled 342 chests of British tea into the water. The very next day, Revere mounted his horse and rode to New York and Philadelphia to spread the word of the Boston Tea Party. This was what Revere did. He was a rider, a messenger, and a man who carried the spark of revolution from town to town. He became the principal express rider for the Boston Committee of Safety, making countless trips to New York, Philadelphia, and beyond. And by 1775, Revere had organized a spy network that kept watch on the movements of British garrisons in Boston, reporting every troop movement, every supply shipment, and every whispered order. The revolution had not yet begun, but the fuse was lit, and Paul Revere was watching the flame. By mid-April of 1775, the situation in Massachusetts had reached a breaking point. The British military governor, General Thomas Gage, had received orders to disarm the colonial militias and arrest the ringleaders of the rebellion. Revere's spy network detected that something big was coming. On April 16th, Revere himself rode to Concord to warn the Patriots to move their stockpiled weapons and ammunition to safer locations. Then came the evening of April 18th. At approximately 9 o'clock at night, Dr. Joseph Warren, Revere's old friend from the dentist's chair, now one of the top Patriot leaders in Boston, summoned Revere with urgent intelligence. 700 British regulars were preparing to cross the Charles River under the cover of darkness. Their mission: march to Lexington and arrest Sam Adams and John Hancock, and then continue to Concord to seize the colonial military supplies. Warren dispatched 2 riders. William Dawes would take the longer land route out of Boston through the narrow Boston Neck. Revere would go by water. But first, Revere had one critical task. He sent word to Robert Newman, the sexton of Christ Church in Boston's North End, the Old North Church. The signal had been prearranged: 1 lantern in the steeple if the British were marching by land, and 2 lanterns if they were crossing by sea. Newman climbed the darkened steeple and hung 2 lanterns in the arched window. The message blazed across the harbor into the night: the British were coming by water. Revere slipped down the waterfront, where 2 fellow patriots waited with a rowboat. Under the shadow of a British warship, they rowed him silently across the Charles River to Charleston. There, allies had a horse waiting, a fast, powerful mare. Revere swung into the saddle and kicked the horse into a gallop. It was approximately 11 o'clock at night. Almost immediately, Revere spotted 2 British officers on horseback lurking in the shadows near Charlestown. One charged towards him. Revere wheeled his horse and took off in the opposite direction, veering away from his planned route and riding hard through the countryside towards Medford. In Medford, he pounded on the door of Isaac Hull, captain of the local Minutemen, and delivered the alarm. Then he tore onward, riding from house to house, riding through the towns of Menominee, present-day Arlington, waking families, shouting the warning: the regulars are marching. Revere arrived in Lexington sometime after midnight. He rode straight to the house where Adams and Hancock were staying under guard. When a sentry told him to stop making so much noise, Revere's reply has echoed throughout centuries: "Noise? You'll have enough noise before long. The regulars are coming out." Adams and Hancock were roused, and preparations were made for their escape. After 12:30, William Dawes arrived in Lexington, having made it through by land. After a brief rest, 2 riders decided to push on towards Concord. Along the way, they were joined by Dr. Samuel Prescott, a young patriot who had been returning home from a late evening. But the road to Concord held danger. A British mounted patrol intercepted all 3 men. Prescott, who knew the local terrain, jumped his horse over a stone wall and escaped into the darkness. He would be the one to reach Concord and deliver the warning. Dawes was thrown from his horse and turned back. Revere was captured. The British officers surrounded him, pressed pistols to his chest, and demanded to know who he was. Revere, with characteristic boldness, told them exactly who he was and exactly what he had done. He informed his captors that the entire countryside was now awake and armed, and that 500 militiamen were already assembling. The officers, alarmed by this intelligence and by the distant sound of gunshots and alarm bells, confirming Revere's claims, decided to ride towards Lexington rather than continue to Concord. They confiscated Revere's horse and eventually released him on foot. Revere walked back to Lexington in the darkness. He arrived just in time to help Hancock and Adams make their final escape, carrying a trunk full of important documents to safety. As dawn broke over the Lexington Green on April 19, 1775, roughly 70 colonial Minutemen stood in formation facing the advancing column of British regulars. Thanks to the midnight riders, they were awake, they were armed, and they were ready. A shot rang out, fired by which side no one knows to this day. Then a volley. When the smoke cleared, 8 American militiamen lay dead on the green. The British marched towards Concord. But at Concord's North Bridge, they found nearly 400 armed colonists waiting for them, men who had been awakened and rallied by Prescott, by Revere, and by the dozens of other riders who had fanned across the countryside in those dark hours. The British were driven back, and as they retreated the long road to Boston, militiamen fired on them from behind every stone wall, every tree, and every farmhouse. The American Revolution had begun. What Revere did was something arguably greater than any other single ride. Over the years leading up to that night, he built the network, he organized the signals, and he ran the intelligence. He was the man who made sure that when the moment came, the system worked. After the war, Revere went on to cast cannons and church bells, opening the first successful copper rolling mill in North America, in providing the copper sheeting for the hull of the USS Constitution and the dome of the Massachusetts State House. He lived to the age of 83, dying peacefully in Boston on May 10, 1818, a patriot to his very last breath. But it is that single night where we remember most, a night when a silversmith from Boston's North End climbed into a borrowed horse and rode into the darkness to warn his countrymen that tyranny was on the march, a night when one man's courage helped give birth to a nation. If you enjoyed this deep dive into American history told in story form, consider subscribing for more narratives where we peel back the smoke of time and see what still waves in the dawn's early light.